Hey, church family. Pray that you're all doing well. And I wanted to follow up from the sermon on Sunday and talk about the enemy of gratitude. Grumbling and complaining, they both undermine the grace of God and they poison the heart. Now, there's a movie series from the 1990s that is about two men, and I'm going to give you a few descriptive words, and I want to see if you can name these movies. Complaining, negativity, intolerance, uncompromising, griping, fussing, grumpiness. What movie series has characters known for these magnetic characteristics? Well, you guessed it. You're probably way ahead of me. It was the Grumpy Old Men movies. One of the reasons these movies were so well received was because, as Hollywood does very well, they allowed us to witness the main characters, Walter Matthau and John Lemon, get away with totally exaggerated attitudes and behaviors on the premise of grumpiness. Because these characters were able to explain their irritability through comedy, the movies became an audience favorite. However, if we were to practice their words and their actions off the screen, we would be far from anybody's favorite. Because in reality, no one likes to spend time with a complainer or a grumbler or, a grumpy old man. Studies have shown that few things are more detrimental to our health than a bad attitude. Because our attitudes begin with our mindset. If our perspective is stuck in the muck of negativity, then our body, our behaviors, our mental, emotional, even physical health will begin to take on this posture, a posture of negativity. In fact, the dictionary defines ingratitude as the failure or refusal to acknowledge receipt of something good from someone else, the forgetfulness of or a poor return of kindness. Ingratitude is the choice not to recognize good or kindness in our lives. It is the choice to take on the mindset and the spirit of the grumpy old men. The Bible is full of stories originating from a heart of ingratitude. Many of the most disheartening stories in the Bible begin with a spirit of ingratitude. We all know the story of Cain killing his brother Abel. Both brothers offered a sacrifice to God. Abel's sacrifice was acceptable, Cain's wasn't. Knowing Cain's sacrifice was given from an ungrateful heart, God rejected his offering. And Cain's ungrateful spirit sparked a wave of stewing anger, which convinced Cain that the answer to his wounded pride was not a reflection of his ungrateful sacrifice, but the murder of his brother. King David is another example. David lived a blessed life. The Lord gave him a flourishing kingdom, a successful career as king, a wife who loved him, healthy family, well-being, provision. However, the moment his gaze shifted from the goodness and the mercies in his life and allowed his heart to follow his eyes as he scanned the neighbors' rooftops, David coveted what he didn't have. And in his heart, he became ungrateful. In turn, his ungrateful spirit led to a great sin, adultery. And even under the umbrella of his grave repentance and God's forgiveness, the remainder of his reign was stained. His life was scarred by his sin. All because his focus shifted from the Lord's grace, or that charis that was in his life, forgetting all for which he had been grateful. Think of the story we read about of the Israelites in Exodus chapter 16. After 45 days of traveling, Israel's resources were running dry, and with dwindling resources, their hunger and exhaustion took their reserve. The excitement over escaping their enemies and their newfound sense of freedom were quietly squelched out by their physical needs. As their bellies began to rumble, their mouths began to grumble. Exodus 16:2 says, "And the whole congregation of people in Israel grumbled against Moses and Aaron in the wilderness." Just as we struggle with the gravity of our physical needs, so too did Israel. Overcome by their fear of hunger, Israel's focus shifted from the Lord's provision to what another could provide instead, mainly Egypt. They wanted to go back. Their complaint surpassed their empty bellies to a resolve that Egypt could better care for them than God could in their time of need. So the Lord, being gentle with his spiritual infants, heard their grumble and graciously provided his children by sending them quail from the sky and birthing manna from the ground. However, Moses takes this moment as a teaching opportunity and addresses their toxic attitudes. And in essence, Moses warns Israel saying, hey, this attitude, this complaining amongst yourselves, this underlying murmuring is not against us. And he's talking about Aaron and himself. Your words are against the Lord. Is this who we are? Are we a people that would grumble against the Lord's provisions? Moses understood what the people didn't yet understand, that we become what we behold. If we behold anger, we become angry people. If we behold envy, we become beholden to jealousy. If we harbor frustration, we transform into a quarrelsome person whose arguments keep us from getting along with others. Moses knew that if the people beheld grumbling, they would become a people far, far, far from the heart of the Lord. James understood this as well and spoke about this in his letter to the early church. When he surveyed his congregation, he found his body of believers was adopting different postures of sin. James urged them, as Moses did with the Israelites, to guard themselves. James tells his fellow Christ followers, many of whom were also infants in their faith, that even in the most significant trials, to remain strong with an attitude of Christ. For if they didn't, they would become beholden to the sin that is beckoning them. Grumbling always takes the form of the small sins: discontent, fussiness, gossip, negativity, intolerance, impatience, uncompromising and unyielding mindsets and behaviors. Grumbling sneakily destructs the strongest of believers, and it has the power to pull the strongest believers, those who were once in awe of the greatness of their salvation, pull them far, far away from God in the grips of darkness. So ask yourself today, is there a sense of discontent in your soul? Do you find yourself stuck in the why? Closely examine your thoughts, your attitudes, and your words. Ask yourself, where do I grumble? Am I complaining a lot? Do I look at my spouse and say, this isn't enough? Am I living in a state of, I want, I wish, I had, I miss? Do you look at other people's lives and wish that you had their experiences, their possessions, their spouse, their children, their house, their jobs, their friends? These grumbles that take the form of questions, murmurs under our breath, thoughts crossing our minds, which at times seep out into our conversations, are in actuality what the Bible refers to as a spirit of ingratitude. A grumbling heart is the antithesis of a grateful heart. Thankfully, grumbling does not have the final say. God's grace surpasses the grumble. He is gracious to forgive. And the answer to our ingratitude does not require a movement of mountains. You can begin to push the needle forward and start practicing gratitude right now. Ask yourself, how can I move the needle forward in my life this week? Does it include a gratitude practice? Does it include moving out of my comfort zone and beginning to understand gratitude more and more? If you feel stuck in the whys, is it because you need to release something to the Lord? Do you grumble in your spirit? Have you taken a posture of ingratitude? How can you replace this mindset with gratitude? The beauty of the gospel of grace is just that. It's a freedom based on God's grace. You don't have to earn your way into a spirit and a posture of gratitude. You can receive grace at any time and you can live in it. Church family, practicing gratitude, accepting and experiencing His grace can begin right now. We love you, church family, and we'll see you very, very soon.